But so I'm Mark, VP of Engineering at Red Hat. I run the middleware engineering groups. I came to Red Hat in 2006 from Jboss, when Red Hat acquired Jboss, and in the intervening 15, 16 years, we've grown that to include more than just the app server. We have integration with Fuse, we have API management. We've got business process management, lots of different middleware capabilities, which we're now growing, or have been for the last few years, growing to to run on OpenShift and in the cloud with hyperscalers like Microsoft. So, like I said, thank you for inviting me.
So I must tell you that I'm actually a huge fan of Red Hat. It's one of the reasons why I actually got into Microsoft. So long time ago, we looked at Visual Studio Code, and we started moving Visual Studio Code into an off-process language server. And I remember I spoke to the head of DevRel, Patrick Chanizan, and I said, listen, I'm in love with that language server. And I see the world moving to a more distributed IDE and developer experience. And here I am speaking to Mark Little, VP of Red Hat Dev Tooling, and I have to pinch myself, which is really difficult because I was walking in the morning in the freezing cold Johannesburg air, which is like 20 degrees. So I'm very cold and I'm very exercised yet. So I've got some questions that I want to ask you, and then you can ask me some questions also, yep. Because I'm just above, on cloud nine, right? So first, thank you about and introducing yourself and everything. So you mentioned a few products there, and I know that I've done a few sessions around those products, and there's so many offerings that Red Hat has with partnering with their Zero. It can kind of get a little bit overwhelming that you have so many products, though. So touch on some of those products that you have for Red Hat products on app service, and tell me what we can look forward to in some of those products.
So I think my personal favorite has got to be EAP, our enterprise application server, which is Jakarta compatible. So I think we did, as in Red Hat and Microsoft, we did an announcement about that a few months back. Obviously, EAP's got a huge heritage in the Java EE app server domain, going back to Jboss AS, when Mark Fleury created Jboss before, like I said, before Red Hat. It's probably the most popular open source application server in the world. And it's good to have it on Azure. Other things that were, you mentioned VS Code. I know that's not necessarily exactly in that space that you're talking about, but I did want to say, following on from what you were mentioning there, I'm incredibly impressed with the work that we've done together on the whole VS Code thing. I think you were telling me, I have some figures, but I think you were telling me the other day, I know it's millions of downloads.
Millions of downloads, like 12 to 15 million downloads. But we have active users right now using that language server, 1.5 million developers.
Yeah.
Now, understand there's like 10 million Java developers in the world, as per all the stats that go in there. That means nearly 15% of them are actively using Visual Studio Code and Java.
Yeah.
And when I speak to developers and I say to them, why use this tool set compared to others? And they said, first of all, it's a delightful experience from start to finish. I did a session, I've recorded a session for Microsoft Build coming up, and I go from the browser, and I just go in the browser all the way through to the Azure service, though, and I end the session with, wow, that was, even for me, that was just delightful. Now, paired with GitHub and a lot of those features, though, what you get is productivity and developer velocity. And I really think that with the Red Hat language server and the Red Hat toolings with Jboss EAP, you get increased velocity. Now, gone are the days that I came from a banking background where you had a deployment, and I remember saying to one of the engineering team leads, "Okay, I've got this this WAR I need to deploy it. When can I go live with it?" And at the time it was like June. He goes, "Summer." And I go, "But it's June. That's winter in Johannesburg." He goes, "Yeah, you can go there." And now we're going multiple times live per day, and we're having GitHub Actions and CodeQL and all these open source tooling though. And it's just I'm baffled by the developer velocity. So yes, I agree with you totally around the VS Code and the incredible experience that the developer has to look forward to today. We've just launched also Jboss Clustering on EAP. And one of the things that I actually used to, when an interview, when I used to apply for a job, and people used to say, so Rory, exactly why should we hire you? I go, "I know Jboss Clustering." And I go, "You're hired," immediately right there, because it was such a kind of like an incredible skill to have. Touch on Jboss Clustering with Wildfly and what that means to users.
So, I mean, you're right. Back in the day when application servers in general started to add clustering, it was tricky, to say the least. You didn't have auto clustering, which is essentially what we've now got. We've had this in Wildfly and EAP for a number of years, where you literally spin up another EAP instance, and they essentially auto detect. You don't have to really change anything from your application point of view. And you can have any number of EAP instances in a cluster. And once you've got clustering, you've got potential for high availability and load balancing, and it's all pretty seamless. Like I said, we've had that in EAP for a long time. Predates cloud, let alone predates Kubernetes. When cloud and kube came along, we had to make some changes to the way in which clustering works, because Kubernetes does clustering itself, for instance. So you don't want one clustering mechanism to compete with another, particularly if Kubernetes is essentially the dominant instance. So we've made some changes to EAP. So once you deploy into a cloud, kube-based or not kube-based, it works with the clustering mechanism that's basically there. And again, it's pretty seamless. You don't need to go in and hack XML configuration files, or or even lower level than XML.
So the other thing also is caching. So we have not only Red Hat caches, but we also have third-party caches. And it's also something that I remember basing my career on: first-level cache, second-level cache. I remember phoning someone in Argentina about Jboss rules and working out how the caching system works, though. So this was even before you did the renaming to rules, to the rules engine, though, and then working out, that's how long ago it is, though. And the caching services that you have really are incredible with the Wildfly and also that. And I just want to do a shout out for if there is a Redis teams out there listening to this live call, though, because when you have Jboss, you have Redis, and then you have the clustering around that. It's a really great experience, though. But we also support microprofile and some of the Java EE specs, though. So let's touch on a little bit about, what do developers, now you've got Jboss, you've got the platform, what can they look forward to Jakarta EE and microprofile?
All right, so let's tackle Jakarta EE first. So for those of you who don't know, Jakarta EE is essentially the open source version of Java EE. Java EE, or J2EE, if you haven't looked at that for a long time, was an enterprise Java standard that was developed under the original leadership of Sun Microsystems, and then Oracle, when Oracle acquired Sun, and with cross-vendor support. So Red Hat, IBM, HP back in the day. Lots of vendors were contributing to this series of specs. In 2018, Oracle approached Red Hat and IBM and Tommy Tribe, who are another Java EE vendor, to move that to an open forum or a foundation, and we selected with them the Eclipse Foundation. So I know we were talking about VS Code before. A lot of people might think of the Eclipse Foundation as the place that you get the Eclipse IDE, and it absolutely is. That was essentially what created it. But these days, the Eclipse Foundation does a lot more than an IDE. And one of those things that it does is now Jakarta. So all of the specs that were in some ways proprietary, not necessarily everything was open source, they got moved to the Eclipse Foundation, got renamed to Jakarta EE. And now that is evolving, again, based on lots more, in fact, vendor collaboration. So, Microsoft, Alibaba, lots more people and lots more vendors are involved in Jakarta EE and the Eclipse Foundation than were ever involved in the Oracle/Sun Java community process version. So collaboratively, we're looking to move that towards being more cloud native, also more streamlined. So for better or for worse, Java EE, got this perception that it was very monolithic, very slow moving, and you needed to have all or nothing. And to be fair, some of that perception was reality. I remember one of the first things that people used to do with Jboss back in the day was try and trim it down, and this is way before the Jboss company was acquired by Red Hat, and they've been doing that with lots of other app servers. So there is some reality to that perception. So we're working really hard on that to try and make it more cloud native, if you like. The other thing that you mentioned, though, is microprofile. So microprofile actually predates.
You need to tell us a little bit about microprofile and also Graal and also all of the other niceties that sit on front of it, because everyone has jumped on this bandwagon now. And right now, there is literally, every time I start up YouTube, there's something new about that. So yeah, demystify it for them.
All right, so microprofile started in 2016 with the London Java User Group, Red Hat, IBM, Pyara, and Tommy Tribe. Essentially, we were working with Java EE at the time. This is, like I said, this predates Jakarta, so it predates the move to the Eclipse Foundation. And at that stage, Oracle wasn't really evolving Java EE quickly enough. We were seeing lots of things happening with microservices. Each of the vendors that was involved and the London Java User Group were seeing people taking those app servers, Jboss, for instance, or Pyara, and trying to pare them down to be more applicable to a microservice environment. So we decided to take some of the specs from Java EE, create microprofile, and then try and rapidly evolve new specifications in a fully open source manner that would be much more applicable to microservices, and essentially say we don't want a lot of the things that you might get from your typical application server. That was microprofile. We moved that to the Eclipse Foundation at the tail end of 2016. Microprofile has continued to work very rapidly. I think we're on version 5 now, and there have been lots of sub-releases of that, lots of new specs. So I think we went from 3 specs initially in 2016 to something like 14, 15 specs that have been ratified now, and more that are being worked on by the community. And Microsoft is involved in that community as well. So it's great to see, again, much wider collaboration. One of the things that we need to figure out is, how does microprofile and Jakarta EE work well together? We don't know that yet. There is no answer. Those communities are continuing to have those conversations and try and collaborate. But you'll see a lot of app server vendors are now adding microprofile into their app server. So EAP has that. So I mentioned, EAP is now on Azure. You can have an EAP application that only codes to the Jakarta EE specs fine. If you want to code to the microprofile specs, which is a subset, or actually it's more of an overlapping subset, you can do that, and that's through something called Eap Xp. So the XP component is the microprofile specs, and you can have a fully compliant microprofile application that sits on EAP and doesn't have to use any of the Jakarta E capabilities, which means that if you then want to move it to another microprofile compatible implementation, you can do that, and you don't need to worry if that one says, I don't even use anything from Jakarta E. You should just be able to do a lift and shift. It's interesting that you did mention GraalVM. That's actually not in microprofile. It's not in Jakarta, but I think it's a huge innovation in the Java space in the last few years. For those who haven't heard about it, essentially GraalVM is a big project, but the thing that I think is probably the most interesting bit is the Java native image aspect to this, which essentially allows you to take your Java bytecode, which we all know for the last 20 years allows you to build once and run anywhere, but you can then compile it. So you get rid of that build once, run anywhere capability, but you then end up with something that is much smaller typically and can spin up much quicker. So there are trade-offs. But what this does, and Red Hat has shown this, other vendors are using it and have shown this too. It takes Java into the realm of being absolutely applicable for things like serverless, where you do want to spin things up very, very quickly, and maybe they only run for a few seconds before you get rid of them. Trying to do that with your traditional JVM. It's possible. You have to do various tricks, but it's still not necessarily as efficient. And it also makes Java, in the native format at least, comparable with the likes of Go and JavaScript in terms of its density. So you can get many more instances of a native imaged Java application crammed onto your public cloud node than you could with a traditional JVM. Like I said, not specific to microprofile or Jakarta. They can be used. Graal can be used in lots of different areas, but we are seeing participants in both of those upstream communities looking to use GraalVM.
It's an incredibly exciting time to be a Java developer, and I always marvel at now the JavaScript developers are compiling their code, but we're double compiling our code into native imaging there. But you also have other tooling, like you told me yesterday when we were preparing for this. You have a new testing framework that you told me about, that I went and downloaded and played with it, that I was really excited about. Though, tell me a little bit about that testing framework and some of also the other tools that are coming up.
You'll have to remind me about the testing framework, unfortunately. It's been a long day already.
I misspelt it. It's Aquavit. Aquavit.
Oh, right. Oh, yes. So yeah, because we do have a few testing frameworks. So this one is great. And interestingly, again, it's another Eclipse Foundation project. So, or at least it is these days. Hopefully some people in the audience, or lots of people in the audience, will know about something called Adopt Open Jdk. So this is an effort that was created, I think, about 5 years ago. IBM and the London Java User Group initially kicked it off. And then other vendors like Red Hat and Microsoft started to get involved. And essentially what Adopt Open Jdk was doing was trying to be that single point of contact for developers anywhere in the world who wanted to get a solid build of Open Jdk for their platform. So, if you were running on Ubuntu and you wanted to know what is the best Open Jdk implementation that I can get for Ubuntu, you could go to Adopt Open Jdk and you could download an official version from that. Now, Adopt Open Jdk didn't have the rights to what's called the TCK, so that's a certification toolkit, essentially, or test suite that Sun and Oracle have, which TCK compliant or compatible implementations pass, and it tests some fairly low-level capabilities of Java, not specifically Open Jdk, but any Java implementation that wants to claim to be Java needs to pass the TCK. So like I said, Adopt didn't have that. So over the last 5 years, they've been, I think they had, the last figures I saw a few weeks back, something like 350 million downloads in 5 years from Adopt. Those, to ensure that those downloads were solid and people could rely on them, even in mission critical environments, that group built something called Aquavit, which is a test suite, tens of thousands of tests that they run that obviously test a lot of capabilities of Open Jdk in lots of different environments, including the graphical side of things, headless, server side, client side. All these things are tested by Aquavit, and it's a very, very rich test suite, and it's continuing to evolve. When Adopt Open Jdk moved to the Eclipse Foundation, all of that moved to the Eclipse Foundation, and that became known as Eclipse Adoptium. That happened about a year ago, and I think in the last 12 months, again, the latest figures I saw was something like 40 to 50 million downloads of official Open Jdk builds from Adoptium. So I think it's a phenomenal community effort there.
I hear the millions and everything like that, and the numbers just baffle me. And now, like we just launched Playwright, which is the Microsoft testing suite, and allows you to do Selenium front-end testing around that. I really need to do a head-on-head with that and see how we can leverage and do a great partnership between that tool suite, testing suite, and then Playwright. And we've always been great partners. Like one of the things that that you touched on is the partnership between Microsoft and Red Hat, and the stewardess of Open Jdk. And Microsoft really is doing a lot to engage with the developer community. We have the Microsoft version of Open Jdk, we have the Visual Studio, we have GitHub Actions, and we have CodeQL, which also looks at the vulnerabilities that you can get in your code for free, actually. I don't know if you're aware of that. You've got a public repo. You can find out your vulnerabilities for that. Where do you see the partnership moving towards, and where also would you like me as an advocate to focus on our developers and say, listen, guys, this is where development is going to go. Where would you like me to lead them into the path of righteousness?
So first of all, it would be great if you have this test suite and you can convince the powers that be at Microsoft to donate it to the Aquavit effort, because I think if we can make Adoptium again, like Adopt Open Jdk, the single source of truth for people to get really good, the best, the most solid and supported versions of Open Jdk. That would be phenomenal. So that would be a great thing for us to build on the partnership for. In terms of the next bit of your question, I think it's almost like what I was saying a minute ago about Adoptium. I think we've got to get away from the era of having each vendor that's really interested in Java trying to be the single source of truth for Java, because that doesn't scale and it's confusing. Red Hat can do quite a bit, Microsoft can do quite a bit, but there's going to be a lot of overlap. And I think if you look at what other languages are trying to do and biting away at Java's lunch, if you like, I think by collaborating more, those vendors can really make Java continue to be extremely relevant. So it doesn't have to be in the Eclipse Foundation, but I'll use that just because we're collaborating there anyway. But having something where we can all come together in a vendor-neutral manner and actually grow the information that we put there. And yes, maybe there are some things that we have to have on a bespoke vendor-specific site, Microsoft's or Red Hat's or IBM's or whatever. But if the main body of knowledge and the main community efforts are in a vendor-neutral, collaborative manner, following good open source practices, I think that'd be phenomenal for the vendors, but also for those 10 million Java developers that we talked about.
That was a really good question. Basically, make sure that we all get along. Make sure that Java is at what I would say is a honeymoon stage. Developers are falling in love with it. Developers are falling in love with the Red Hat tooling, and make sure that they understand there is no more them and us. It's everyone together. Yeah. Mark, thank you so much for today. I'm going to bring in the next speakers, and I want you I want them to meet you also. And then let's do a changeover. And I love how we do this in a changeover, just a seamless changeover. But before we go, is there a call to action that you want to give all of the listeners out there, a URL or a call to action?
I would say, go to the Eclipse Foundation, look at Adoptium, look at MicroProfile, look at Jakarta, and take a look at GraalVM and Quarkus from Red Hat, Quarkus.io.
Oh, no, you didn't. You can't just drop Quarkus at the end of a talk, though. And, oh, my gosh. Okay, now I'm going to be called in by HR.
Quarkus uses Graal.
No, okay, it's fine. Everyone, calm down. I know that you mentioned Quarkus, and there's waves now. The whole ecosystem now has just kind of burst from the seams, though. Okay, so.